Question 1. During an audit of a food processing facility, an auditor reviews records pertaining to a critical control point, CCP, for pasteurization. The records indicate a temperature deviation below the specified limit for a batch of milk. The facility's documented procedure for deviation handling requires immediate segregation of affected product and a root cause analysis. The auditor finds that the batch was not segregated, but was instead blended with a subsequent, properly pasteurized batch, and the temperature log was adjusted to reflect the correct parameter without any notation of the deviation. Which of the following best describes the auditor's primary concern regarding data integrity and the food safety management system? Option A. The blending of the deviated batch with a conforming batch indicates a potential violation of HACCP principles regarding product segregation. Option B. The lack of a formal retraining program for personnel responsible for operating the pasteurization equipment highlights an issue with human resource management. Option C. The manipulation of records to conceal a deviation undermines data integrity and suggests a failure in the control of potentially unsafe food as per ISO 22000-2018 Clause 8. 5. 4. Option D. The failure to conduct a timely root cause analysis for the temperature deviation demonstrates a weakness in the corrective action process. The correct answer is C. The manipulation of records to conceal a deviation undermines data integrity and suggests a failure in the control of potentially unsafe food as per ISO 22000-2018 Clause 8. 5. 4. Explanation. ISO 22000-2018, specifically Clause 8. 5. 4. Addresses the control of potentially unsafe food. When a process deviation occurs that could lead to a potential food safety hazard, the organization must take immediate action to correct the situation. This involves identifying the deviation, assessing its impact on food safety, and implementing corrective actions to prevent recurrence. For an auditor, verifying the effectiveness of these controls requires examining documented procedures for deviation handling, evidence of deviations that have occurred, the root cause analysis performed, and the implemented corrective and preventive actions. The auditor must also confirm that any affected product has been properly identified and controlled according to the established procedures, which might include segregation, reprocessing, or destruction, depending on the risk assessment. The focus is on ensuring that the system effectively manages deviations to maintain food safety, and that records accurately reflect these events and the actions taken. The auditor's role is to confirm that the organization's internal processes for managing such events align with the requirements of the standard, and that the integrity of the food safety system is preserved through robust deviation management. This includes verifying that records are not altered to conceal deviations, but rather accurately document them and the subsequent actions. Question 2. When auditing a food manufacturer that has recently incorporated a novel, exotic mushroom variety into its popular savory snack product, and this mushroom has no established allergen classification, but is being used for the first time, which aspect of the hazard analysis technique employed by the auditee would an ISO 22000-2018 auditor most critically scrutinize to ensure the food safety management system's effectiveness in identifying potential risks? Option A. The systematic inclusion of questions within the hazard analysis methodology that probe the mushroom's geographical origin, cultivation practices, known cross-reactivity with other food components, and potential for residual presence in the final product. Option B. The frequency with which the hazard analysis was reviewed and updated by the food safety team after the initial implementation of the new ingredient. Option C. The number of external expert consultations sought by the manufacturer to validate the safety profile of the novel mushroom ingredient. Option D. The detailed documentation of the decision-making process for selecting the specific hazard control measures applied to the mushroom during processing. The correct answer is A. The systematic inclusion of questions within the hazard analysis methodology that probe the mushroom's geographical origin, cultivation practices, known cross-reactivity with other food components, and potential for residual presence in the final product. Explanation. The question probes the auditor's understanding of how to assess the effectiveness of hazard analysis techniques within a food safety management system, specifically when a new, potentially allergenic ingredient is introduced. ISO 22000-2018 emphasizes a risk-based approach to food safety. When a novel ingredient like a specific type of mushroom, which may not have widely documented allergenic properties, but is being used for the first time in a product line, is introduced, the organization must conduct a thorough hazard analysis. This analysis should identify potential biological, chemical, and physical hazards, including allergens. The effectiveness of the hazard analysis technique employed is judged by its ability to systematically identify and evaluate these hazards. A decision tree is a structured method that guides the hazard analysis process by asking a series of questions to determine if a hazard is significant and requires control. When evaluating a new ingredient with unknown allergenic potential, decision tree would be particularly useful if it includes specific branches to investigate the ingredient's origin, processing history, known cross-reactivity with other substances, and potential for carryover in the final product. The auditor's role is to verify that the chosen technique, whether a decision tree or another appropriate method like a risk assessment matrix, is sufficiently robust to uncover such emerging risks. The question requires the auditor to consider the practical application of hazard analysis tools in a novel situation, focusing on the systematic identification and evaluation of potential allergens that might not be immediately obvious. The best approach would involve a technique that rigorously questions the ingredient's safety profile, considering its sourcing and processing to uncover any latent allergenic risks. Question 3. During an audit of a facility that produces ready-to-eat meals for export to a country with stringent allergen labeling laws, the auditor discovers that, while the facility has a robust hack plan and allergen control program, it has not systematically identified or incorporated the specific allergen declaration requirements mandated by the destination country's food safety legislation into its product labeling procedures. The facility relies on a general understanding of international food labeling practices. Which of the following best describes the auditor's finding regarding the organization's adherence to legal requirements for food businesses under ISO 22000-2018? Option A. Observation indicating a need for improved internal communication regarding evolving international food safety standards. Option B. Minor nonconformity due to the focus on the internal allergen control program rather than external regulatory compliance. Option C. Nonconformity related to the failure to identify and comply with specific, applicable legal and other requirements concerning food safety and their impact on product labeling. Option D. Opportunity for improvement in the organization's supplier verification process for raw material ingredients. The correct answer is C. Nonconformity related to the failure to identify and comply with specific, applicable legal and other requirements concerning food safety and their impact on product labeling. Explanation. When auditing a food business against ISO 22000-2018, an auditor must verify the organization's compliance with applicable legal and regulatory requirements related to food safety. These requirements are often multifaceted and can include national food laws, import/export regulations, specific product standards, and labeling laws. For instance, a food business operating in the European Union must comply with Regulation EC No. 178/2002, which lays down the general principles and requirements of food law, establishes the European Food Safety Authority, and lays down procedures in matters of food chain security. Additionally, specific product categories may have further regulations, such as those pertaining to novel foods or genetically modified organisms. An auditor would assess how the organization identifies, understands, and implements these obligations. This involves reviewing documented procedures, training records, product specifications, and records of compliance activities. The effectiveness of the system is judged by its ability to consistently ensure that products placed on the market meet all relevant legal standards, thereby protecting consumer health. Failure to meet these requirements can lead to significant legal penalties, product recalls, and damage to the organization's reputation. The auditor's role is to provide assurance that the organization has a robust system in place to manage these legal obligations. Question 4. An auditor observes that a critical control point, CCP, for a high-risk dairy product, which specifies a minimum pasteurization temperature of /72/circ/text/C/ for 15 seconds, has been breached on 3 occasions within the past month, with recorded temperatures falling to /71. 5/circ/text/C/. /71, 8 /circ /text C / and /71, 7 /circ /text C /. The organization's immediate response has been to recalibrate the temperature sensor after each incident and to segregate the affected product batches for further testing. Considering the requirements of ISO 22000-2018 for managing nonconformities, which of the following approaches best demonstrates an effective corrective action process for this recurring CCP deviation? Option A. Focus solely on the recalibration of temperature sensors and increase the frequency of finished product testing to ensure no unsafe product enters the market. Option B. Immediately adjust the critical limit for pasteurization to /71, 5 /circ text C / to align with the observed process capability and reinforce operator training on monitoring procedures. Option C. Conduct a thorough root cause analysis to determine why the pasteurization temperature consistently fell below the critical limit and implement systemic changes to prevent recurrence, alongside continued monitoring and segregation of affected product. Option D. Implement a documented procedure for immediate product recall for any batch where the pasteurization temperature deviates by more than /0, 5 /circ text C / from the specified critical limit. Correct answer is C. Conduct a thorough root cause analysis to determine why the pasteurization temperature consistently fell below the critical limit and implement systemic changes to prevent recurrence, alongside continued monitoring and segregation of affected product. Explanation. The core principle of ISO 22000-2018, particularly concerning nonconformities and corrective actions, is to address the root cause of an issue to prevent recurrence. When a food safety hazard control measure, such as the critical limit for pasteurization temperature, is found to be consistently breached, the auditor must assess the effectiveness of the organization's response. A critical limit breach indicates a deviation from a prerequisite program or a critical control point that could potentially compromise food safety. The organization's corrective action process should not merely involve adjusting the process to meet the limit again, but must delve into why the limit was breached. This involves identifying the immediate cause of the breach, determining the root cause that allowed the breach to occur and persist, and implementing actions to eliminate that root cause. Simply recalibrating the equipment without understanding why it deviated or why the deviation was not detected and corrected sooner would be insufficient. Similarly, relying solely on product segregation without investigating the systemic issues that led to the deviation does not fulfill the requirements for effective corrective action. The objective is to ensure the food safety management system is robust enough to prevent such deviations or, if they occur, to manage them appropriately and prevent their recurrence. Therefore, the most effective corrective action focuses on understanding and rectifying the underlying reasons for the failure in the control system. Question 5. During an audit of a dairy processing facility, an auditor discovers that a batch of pasteurized milk, due to a temporary malfunction in the temperature monitoring system, was processed at a temperature 2 degrees Celsius below the specified critical control point, CCP limit, for 15 minutes. The facility has a documented crisis management plan. Which of the following actions, as observed by the auditor, best demonstrate the organization's adherence to ISO 22000-2018 Clause 8? 3. Regarding the control of nonconformities in a crisis scenario. Option A. The facility initiated a product recall for the entire day's production, even though only one batch was affected, and did not conduct a specific risk assessment for the identified deviation. Option B. The facility quarantined the batch and decided to repasteurize it, but failed to document the root cause of the temperature deviation or notify any external bodies. Option C. The facility immediately segregated the affected batch, initiated a thorough investigation to determine the potential microbial growth and its impact on public health, documented the deviation and the findings, and notified the relevant regulatory authority about the potential hazard before releasing any product. Option D. The facility conducted a rapid internal review of the temperature log, concluded that the deviation was minor, and proceeded to release the batch after a visual inspection, assuming no significant food safety risk. The correct answer is C. The facility immediately segregated the affected batch, initiated a thorough investigation to determine the potential microbial growth and its impact on public health, documented the deviation and the findings, and notified the relevant regulatory authority about the potential hazard before releasing any product. Explanation: ISO 22000-2018 Clause 8. 3. Control of nonconformities outlines the requirements for managing situations where food safety is compromised. When a nonconformity occurs, the organization must take action to control it and prevent its unintended distribution or introduction. This involves identifying the nonconforming product or process, assessing its potential impact on food safety, and determining appropriate actions. These actions can include rework, condemnation, or diversion to other uses if assured that the food safety is not compromised. Furthermore, the organization must notify relevant parties if the nonconformity has resulted in a significant hazard. The effectiveness of the corrective actions taken must be verified. The auditor's role is to assess whether the organization has established and effectively implemented procedures for identifying, documenting, evaluating, and controlling nonconformities, including those that may lead to a food safety hazard. This includes verifying that the organization has the capability to manage situations that could impact public health and that their response aligns with regulatory requirements and the principles of HACCP. The focus is on preventing recurrence and ensuring that any compromised product is handled in a manner that safeguards consumers. The process involves segregation, investigation, root cause analysis, and implementation of preventative measures. Question 6. During an audit of a dairy processing facility producing pasteurized milk, an auditor is reviewing the control measures for the biological hazard of Coxiella burnetii. The facility has identified pasteurization as a critical control point, CCP, with a validated time-temperature combination designed to achieve a specific log reduction. The auditor has noted that the facility conducts regular CCP monitoring records and has a documented corrective action procedure for deviations. However, the auditor also observes that the environmental monitoring program for Listeria monocytogenes in the post-pasteurization processing and packaging areas has yielded several positive results over the past 6 months, with some samples taken from surfaces near the packaging line showing intermittent presence. Considering the potential for cross-contamination and the nature of Coxiella burnetii, what would be the most appropriate verification activity for the auditor to focus on to assess the overall effectiveness of the control system for this hazard, beyond simply reviewing pasteurization records? Option A. Examining the supplier approval process for raw milk to verify that all milk suppliers have a robust internal testing program for Coxiella burnetii in their raw milk. Option B. Reviewing the results of the environmental monitoring program for Listeria monocytogenes in post-pasteurization areas, correlating positive findings with any documented investigations and subsequent remedial actions taken by the facility to ensure the integrity of the overall hygiene and sanitation program. Option C. Confirming the calibration status of the temperature probes used in the pasteurizer and ensuring that all pasteurization CCP monitoring records are signed and dated by authorized personnel. Option D. Interviewing the pasteurization line operators to assess their understanding of the critical limits and their adherence to standard operating procedures during pasteurization runs. The correct answer is B. Reviewing the results of the environmental monitoring program for Listeria monocytogenes in post-pasteurization areas, correlating positive findings with any documented investigations and subsequent remedial actions taken by the facility to ensure the integrity of the overall hygiene and sanitation program. Explanation: the question probes the auditor's understanding of how to verify the effectiveness of control measures for a specific food safety hazard. In the context of ISO 22000-2018, an auditor must assess whether the implemented control measures are actually achieving their intended purpose. For a biological hazard like Listeria monocytogenes in a ready-to-eat product, a critical control point, CCP, or operational prerequisite program, OPP, might be established. Verification activities are designed to confirm that the control measure is functioning as intended and that the hazard is being controlled to an acceptable level. This involves reviewing records, conducting tests, and observing operations. For Listeria, a key aspect of verification would be to confirm that the processing step, e.g., a thermal process or a post-processing antimicrobial treatment, effectively reduces or eliminates the pathogen. Environmental monitoring programs are also crucial for detecting potential recontamination after processing. Therefore, verifying the effectiveness of a control measure for Listeria would involve assessing the results of both the process control itself and subsequent environmental monitoring to ensure ongoing control. The presence of Listeria in finished product testing, even at low levels, would indicate a potential failure in the control system, necessitating a review of the implemented measures and their verification. The auditor's role is to ensure the system is robust enough to prevent or reduce the hazard to an acceptable level, and that this is demonstrably proven through appropriate verification activities. Question 7. During an audit of a beverage bottling facility, an auditor discovers a small glass fragment embedded in a sealed bottle of sparkling water during a routine packaging line inspection. The facility has documented procedures for handling non-conforming products. What is the auditor's most appropriate immediate action to assess the effectiveness of the food safety management system in this situation? Option A. Instruct the quality control team to manually inspect every bottle produced on that shift for any signs of glass contamination, regardless of cost or time. Option B. Focus solely on the immediate removal of the contaminated bottle from the packaging line and document it as a minor deviation without further investigation. Option C. Immediately halt all production until a thorough external investigation into the source of the glass contamination can be completed. Option D. Verify the organization's implementation of its procedures for segregating the affected batch, investigating the root cause of the glass contamination, and implementing corrective actions to prevent recurrence. The correct answer is D. Verify the organization's implementation of its procedures for segregating the affected batch, investigating the root cause of the glass contamination, and implementing corrective actions to prevent recurrence. Explanation: the auditor's primary responsibility when encountering a confirmed physical hazard, such as a glass shard found in a finished product during a line inspection, is to ensure the effectiveness of the organization's food safety management system in preventing, eliminating, or reducing the hazard to an acceptable level. ISO 22000-2018, specifically Clause 8.5.2, Control of Potentially Hazardous Products, requires the organization to establish and maintain procedures for controlling potentially hazardous products. This includes identifying and segregating such products. The auditor must verify that the organization has implemented its documented procedures for handling non-conforming products, which in this case would involve segregating the affected batch, investigating the root cause of the glass contamination, and implementing corrective actions to prevent recurrence. The auditor's role is not to dictate the specific corrective action, but to assess whether the organization's chosen actions are adequate and effectively implemented to address the identified hazard and its systemic cause. Therefore, the most appropriate auditor action is to verify the effectiveness of the organization's procedures for handling non-conforming products and their corrective actions. This aligns with the auditor's mandate to assess the conformity and effectiveness of the food safety management system. Question 8. During an audit of a food manufacturing facility, an auditor discovers that a key supplier of a critical ingredient implemented a significant change in their processing method for that ingredient without prior notification to the food manufacturer. The food manufacturer's internal quality control team identified a subtle but potentially significant change in the ingredient's chemical profile that could impact the final product's safety. What is the most critical aspect for the auditor to evaluate regarding the food manufacturer's external communication processes in this situation, considering ISO 22000-2018 requirements and potential regulatory implications under food safety legislation? Option A. The organization's documented procedures for receiving, evaluating, and acting upon information received from external suppliers regarding changes to raw materials or their processing, and the evidence of their implementation. Option B. The extent to which the organization proactively solicits updated processing information from all its suppliers on a quarterly basis, regardless of specific notifications. Option C. The frequency and format of the organization's general public relations communications about its supplier vetting processes. Option D. The organization's policy on whether to inform all customers about minor deviations in ingredient profiles, even if no immediate safety risk is identified. Correct answer is A. The organization's documented procedures for receiving, evaluating, and acting upon information received from external suppliers regarding changes to raw materials or their processing, and the evidence of their implementation. Explanation. The core of effective external communication in ISO 22000-2018 lies in ensuring that information exchanged with customers, suppliers, and regulatory bodies is accurate, timely, and addresses relevant food safety matters. Clause 7.4. Communication mandates that the organization shall establish, implement, and maintain communication processes concerning the food safety management system. This includes communication with external interested parties. The effectiveness of these communications is crucial for identifying and managing food safety hazards, responding to incidents, and maintaining compliance with legal and regulatory requirements. When considering a scenario where a supplier has changed a critical raw materials processing method without prior notification, an auditor would assess how the organization's external communication processes handled this information. The organization must have mechanisms to receive and act upon such information from suppliers. If the organization fails to adequately communicate this change internally, leading to a potential food safety risk that is then not communicated externally to customers or relevant authorities, if required by law or the nature of the risk, this represents a breakdown in the system. Therefore, the most critical aspect for an auditor to verify is the organization's ability to manage information received from external parties, especially suppliers, and to ensure appropriate dissemination and action, including any necessary communication to customers or regulatory bodies, as dictated by the Food Safety Management System and applicable legislation. This involves verifying the documented procedures for receiving, evaluating, and responding to supplier notifications, as well as the documented evidence of such communications and actions taken. Question 9. During an audit of a dairy processing plant, an auditor is reviewing the implementation of a HACCP plan for a pasteurized milk product. The auditor observes that the recorded pasteurization temperature for several batches, as indicated by the continuous temperature monitoring system's output, is consistently falling just below the established critical limit of /72/circ/text/c/ for /15/text/seconds/. However, the deviation reports, which are mandatory for any parameter exceeding or falling below critical limits, show no entries for these specific batches. The operational staff claim that minor fluctuations are normal and do not warrant a deviation report unless they are significant or prolonged, which fundamental audit principle is most directly challenged by this discrepancy between observed process data and documented deviation reporting. Option A, due professional care. Option B, independence. Option C, fair presentation. Option D, evidence-based approach. The correct answer is D, evidence-based approach. Explanation. The scenario describes an auditor needing to verify the effectiveness of a HACCP plan's critical control points, CCP, for a specific food product. The auditor observes that the CCP for pasteurization temperature is consistently recorded at a level slightly below the minimum specified limit, but the operational staff are not reporting any deviations. This situation directly challenges the audit principle of evidence-based approach. An evidence-based approach requires that audit conclusions and recommendations are based on the analysis and evaluation of audit evidence. In this case, the documented records, or lack thereof for deviations, do not align with the direct observation of the process parameters. The auditor must gather objective evidence to support their findings. This evidence could include reviewing temperature logs, interviewing personnel, checking calibration records for the temperature monitoring equipment, and potentially conducting a retest or observation of the process. The core issue is the discrepancy between what is recorded and what is observed, necessitating the collection of robust evidence to determine the true state of control. The auditor's role is to ascertain whether the food safety management system is operating as intended and that the CCPs are effective in controlling identified hazards. The failure to record deviations when a CCP parameter is breached is a significant finding that requires thorough investigation using the evidence-based principle. This principle ensures that judgments are not based on assumptions or incomplete information, but rather on verifiable facts. The auditor must not overlook this discrepancy, but rather investigate it to its root cause, which could involve issues with record keeping, training, or the CCP itself. Question 10. During an audit of a dairy processing facility, An auditor observes that the general sanitation procedures for cleaning shared equipment are documented as a prerequisite program, PRP. However, the hazard analysis has identified a significant risk of Listeria monocytogenes cross-contamination from raw milk handling to pasteurized products due to the shared use of a specific processing line. The facility has subsequently implemented a distinct, validated cleaning and disinfection protocol for this line, with documented verification of its effectiveness through environmental swabbing and ATP testing, which is performed before each pasteurization run. How should the auditor classify this enhanced cleaning and disinfection protocol for the shared processing line in the context of ISO 22000-2018? Option A, a corrective action plan. Option B, an operational prerequisite program OPUP. Option C, a critical control point CCP. Option D, a supplementary prerequisite program PRP. The correct answer is B, an operational prerequisite program OPUP. Explanation: the core distinction between prerequisite programs PRP and operational prerequisite programs OPUP lies in their role within the food safety management system. PRPs establish the fundamental environmental and operational conditions necessary to produce safe food. These are foundational and address common hazards that could be introduced into the food. Examples include facility design, pest control, sanitation, and employee hygiene. OPUP, on the other hand, are control measures identified through hazard analysis that are necessary to control a likely food safety hazard. They are specifically implemented because a PRP alone is insufficient to adequately control the identified hazard. The decision to classify a control measure as an OPUP is based on the risk assessment, specifically when a hazard is likely, and the control measure's effectiveness is critical to preventing or reducing the hazard to an acceptable level. An OPUP requires monitoring and verification to ensure its continued effectiveness. Therefore, an OPUP is a control measure that is essential for managing a specific, identified food safety hazard that would otherwise pose an unacceptable risk. The scenario describes a situation where a general cleaning procedure, a PRP, is insufficient to mitigate the risk of microbial cross-contamination from raw materials to finished products. The implementation of a dedicated, validated cleaning and disinfection protocol, specifically for the shared processing line, along with documented verification of its effectiveness, elevates this control measure from a general PRP to an OPUP. This is because it directly addresses a specific, identified hazard, microbial cross-contamination, and requires ongoing monitoring and verification to ensure its efficacy in controlling that hazard. Question 11. A food manufacturer specializing in artisanal cheeses is undergoing an ISO 22000-2018 audit. The auditor is reviewing the organization's approach to identifying and considering the needs of interested parties. The company has a robust system for tracking customer complaints and adhering to national food safety regulations. However, their engagement with local dairy farmers, who supply critical raw milk, is primarily transactional, with minimal formal feedback mechanisms or collaborative discussions on evolving food safety best practices. Which aspect of the organization's FSMS concerning interested parties would most likely require further investigation by the auditor to ensure full compliance with ISO 22000-2018? Option A. Insufficient documented evidence of systematically identifying and addressing the food safety-related requirements of raw material suppliers beyond contractual terms. Option B. The lack of a dedicated department responsible for managing all external stakeholder communications related to food safety. Option C. The company's reliance on regulatory compliance as the sole driver for its prerequisite programs. Option D. The absence of a formal consumer advisory panel to gather direct feedback on product safety perceptions. The correct answer is A. Insufficient documented evidence of systematically identifying and addressing the food safety-related requirements of raw material suppliers beyond contractual terms. Explanation: when auditing a food business's compliance with ISO 22000-2018, an auditor must understand how the organization identifies and addresses the needs and expectations of interested parties. Clause 4.2 of the standard specifically requires the organization to determine which interested parties are relevant to the food safety management system and their requirements. This involves a systematic process of identification, analysis, and integration of these requirements into the FSMS. For instance, Regulatory bodies have legal requirements that must be met, while consumers expect safe and accurately labeled products. Suppliers have expectations regarding timely payments and product specifications. Employees expect a safe working environment and clear procedures. An auditor would look for evidence of a documented process for identifying these parties, understanding their relevant requirements, e.g., through market research, regulatory updates, customer feedback, supplier agreements, and then demonstrating how these requirements are considered in the design, implementation, and improvement of the FSMS. This includes ensuring that critical control points, operational prerequisite programs, and other food safety measures are aligned with these identified needs and expectations. The effectiveness of the FSMS is directly linked to how well these diverse stakeholder interests are incorporated. Question 12. An auditor is reviewing the recall procedure for a large dairy producer following the discovery of a potential listeria contamination in a specific batch of pasteurized milk. The company's internal investigation indicates that the contamination may have occurred during the filling process. The auditor needs to assess the procedure's effectiveness. Which of the following criteria is the most critical indicator of the recall procedure's successful implementation and operational readiness? Option A. The demonstrated ability to accurately and swiftly identify and segregate all potentially affected product batches from the entire supply chain. Option B. The number of consumer complaints received regarding the specific milk batch prior to the recall initiation. Option C. The extent to which the company's marketing department has already issued public statements about the recall. Option D. The total cost incurred by the company in managing the recall process, including product disposal and communication expenses. The correct answer is A. The demonstrated ability to accurately and swiftly identify and segregate all potentially affected product batches from the entire supply chain. Explanation. The effectiveness of a recall procedure is fundamentally assessed by its ability to swiftly and accurately identify and segregate affected products. This involves verifying the completeness of product traceability records, ensuring that all batches potentially impacted by a detected hazard can be pinpointed. The procedure must also confirm that the organization has the capability to immediately halt distribution of these products and communicate the recall to relevant parties, including regulatory bodies and customers, as per the requirements of ISO 22000-2018, Clause 8. 4. 3. A critical aspect is the validation of the recall process itself, which often involves mock recalls or simulation exercises to test the system's responsiveness and the accuracy of product identification and segregation. The speed and precision with which the organization can determine the scope of the recall and initiate corrective actions are paramount. This includes assessing the effectiveness of communication channels and the ability to retrieve or account for all affected products. Therefore, the primary metric for evaluating a recall procedure's success is the demonstrated ability to accurately and rapidly isolate potentially hazardous products from the market and supply chain, thereby protecting public health. Question 13. During an audit of a facility producing ready-to-eat meals with a refrigerated shelf life of 14 days, the auditor reviews the records for the thermal processing of a specific product batch. The organization's internal policy dictates that records related to critical control points, CCP, must be retained for a period equivalent to the product's shelf life, plus an additional 6 months to account for potential regulatory inquiries or product recalls. Considering the typical duration required for effective traceability and the organization's stated retention policy, what is the minimum acceptable retention period for the thermal processing records of this specific batch to comply with the spirit of ISO 22000-2018's record-keeping requirements and the organization's internal policy? Option A, 14 months. Option B, 20 months. Option C, 18 months. Option D, 12 months. The correct answer is B, 20 months. Explanation. ISO 22000-2018 Clause 7. 5. 1 specifies that the organization shall establish and maintain records to provide evidence of conformity to the requirements of this document and of the effective implementation and operation of the food safety management system. This implies a need for records that demonstrate not only that controls are in place, but also that they are functioning as intended. Records are crucial for demonstrating traceability, verifying the effectiveness of prerequisite programs, PRP, and operational prerequisite programs, OPP, supporting hazard analysis and CCP monitoring, and documenting corrective actions and management reviews. When auditing, an auditor would look for records that are legible, identifiable, readily retrievable, and protected from deterioration, loss, and unauthorized alteration. The duration for which records should be maintained is typically determined by regulatory requirements, customer requirements, and the organization's own risk assessment regarding product shelf life and potential recall scenarios. For example, if a product has a shelf life of 18 months, records related to its production might need to be kept for at least that duration plus a buffer for potential investigations or recalls. The principle is to retain records for a period that allows for effective traceability and investigation throughout the product's life cycle and beyond, as dictated by the identified risks and external mandates. Question 14. When assessing an organization's adherence to ISO 22000-2018, what combination of an auditor's background best demonstrates their capability to effectively evaluate the implementation of prerequisite programs and critical control points within a complex food processing environment? Option A. A bachelor's degree in food technology, completion of an accredited hack training course, and a minimum of 3 years of experience in food production quality assurance. Option B. A bachelor's degree in marketing, attendance at a food safety seminar, and 2 years of experience in customer service within the food sector. Option C. A degree in mechanical engineering, a certification in project management, and 4 years of experience in equipment maintenance for food machinery. Option D. A master's degree in business administration, a certificate in general management, and 5 years of experience in financial auditing. The correct answer is A. A bachelor's degree in food technology, completion of an accredited hack training course, and a minimum of 3 years of experience in food production quality assurance. Explanation: the effectiveness of an ISO 22000-2018 food safety management system audit hinges on the auditor's competency. Clause 7.2 of ISO 22000-2018 specifies the competence requirements for personnel who conduct food safety audits. This clause emphasizes the need for auditors to possess a combination of education, training, and experience. Specifically, it outlines that auditors should have a foundation in food science, microbiology, or a related field, which is typically demonstrated through a relevant academic degree. Beyond formal education, practical training in auditing methodologies, food safety principles, including HACCP, prerequisite programs, and the specific requirements of ISO 22000-2018, and risk assessment is crucial. The ISO 22000-2018 standard itself, along with other relevant food safety regulations and guidelines such as Codex Alimentarius principles, must be thoroughly understood. Furthermore, practical experience in the food industry, particularly in roles related to food safety management, quality assurance, or production, is vital for applying theoretical knowledge to real-world scenarios. This experience allows auditors to develop an understanding of operational challenges, common hazards, and the practical implementation of food safety controls. Therefore, an auditor's ability to assess the adequacy and effectiveness of an organization's food safety management system is directly proportional to their comprehensive understanding of these elements and their ability to apply them in an audit context. The combination of these three aspects, education, training, and experience, ensures an auditor can conduct thorough, objective, and value-adding audits. Question 15. During an audit of a food processing facility that manufactures ready-to-eat meals, an auditor reviews the documented procedures for managing risks and opportunities. The organization has identified several potential hazards, including microbial contamination from raw ingredients and cross-contamination during preparation. They have also identified an opportunity to improve shelf life through a novel preservation technique. Which of the following best describes the auditor's expectation for how the organization should demonstrate its actions to address these identified risks and opportunities in accordance with ISO 22000-2018? Option A. The organization has established a food safety team responsible for risk assessment and has implemented corrective actions for any deviations, with a separate innovation department exploring new preservation methods. Option B. The organization has a detailed risk register that lists all identified hazards and their control measures, and has initiated research into the preservation technique without necessarily integrating it into the current food safety management system. Option C. The organization has conducted a thorough hazard analysis and implemented prerequisite programs and operational prerequisite programs to mitigate identified risks, with a separate plan for exploring the preservation technique. Option D. The organization has a documented process for identifying, evaluating, and implementing controls for both negative risks and potential opportunities, with evidence of their effectiveness linked to food safety objectives. The correct answer is D. The organization has a documented process for identifying, evaluating, and implementing controls for both negative risks and potential opportunities, with evidence of their effectiveness linked to food safety objectives. Explanation: the core of addressing risks and opportunities in ISO 22000-2018, specifically within Clause 6.1, is to determine what actions are needed to manage these risks and opportunities. This involves considering the organization's food safety objectives, the context of the organization, and the potential impact of identified hazards and risks. The standard emphasizes a proactive approach. The process begins with identifying hazards and risks, then evaluating their significance, and subsequently planning and implementing control measures. The effectiveness of these measures must then be reviewed. When an auditor assesses an organization's approach to risks and opportunities, they look for evidence that the organization has a systematic process for identifying, evaluating, and treating these factors to ensure the ongoing suitability, adequacy, and effectiveness of the food safety management system. This systematic approach ensures that potential issues are anticipated and managed, and that opportunities for improvement are leveraged. The auditor would expect to see documented procedures, records of risk assessments, and evidence of implemented actions that are linked to the organization's food safety policy and objectives. The focus is on the integration of risk management into the overall food safety management system, rather than isolated activities. This includes ensuring that opportunities for enhancing food safety performance are also identified and pursued. Question 16. During an audit of a facility producing ready-to-eat meals, an auditor is reviewing the effectiveness of controls for chemical hazards arising from cleaning agents. The facility utilizes a broad spectrum of sanitizers and detergents throughout its production areas. Which of the following best demonstrates the auditor's assessment of the control measures for chemical residues from these agents in accordance with ISO 22000-2018? Option A. Examination of the cleaning schedule to ensure all equipment is cleaned daily and a check of the cleaning agent inventory against purchase orders. Option B. Confirmation that all cleaning agents are approved by the local food safety authority and that staff have received basic training on chemical handling. Option C. Verification of documented procedures for cleaning agent application, validation studies demonstrating effective residue removal, and evidence of monitoring for residual chemical levels in the final product or on food contact surfaces. Option D. Review of the supplier's safety data sheets for all cleaning agents and a visual inspection of storage areas to ensure proper segregation. Correct answer is C. Verification of documented procedures for cleaning agent application, validation studies demonstrating effective residue removal, and evidence of monitoring for residual chemical levels in the final product or on food contact surfaces. Explanation: an auditor performing an ISO 22000-2018 audit must verify the effectiveness of controls implemented to manage chemical hazards. When assessing a food processing facility that uses various cleaning agents, the auditor needs to confirm that the selection and application of these agents are based on a thorough risk assessment and that residual levels are controlled. The standard requires that operational prerequisite programs (OPP) and prerequisite programs (PRP) are established, implemented, maintained, and updated. For cleaning agents, this involves identifying potential chemical hazards such as residues of sanitizers, detergents, or disinfectants that could contaminate food. The auditor would examine documented procedures for cleaning, including the types of chemicals used, their concentrations, contact times, and rinsing procedures. They would also look for evidence of validation studies that demonstrate the effectiveness of these procedures in removing or reducing chemical residues to acceptable levels, often referencing national or international standards or regulatory limits for such residues. Furthermore, the auditor checks if the cleaning schedule is integrated with the hack plan, and if any changes in cleaning agents or procedures trigger a review of the food safety management system. The presence of a robust system for managing cleaning agents, including proper storage, labeling, and training of personnel, is crucial. The auditor's focus is on the systematic approach to preventing chemical contamination from cleaning agents, ensuring that the facility's practices align with the principles of hazard control and continuous improvement mandated by ISO 22000-2018. The effectiveness of the control is demonstrated through verification activities, such as testing for residues or visual inspection, and these verification results must be documented and reviewed. Question 17. When auditing an organization's adherence to ISO 22000-2018, particularly concerning the integration of hazard analysis and critical control points, HAC, and prerequisite programs, PRP, what is the primary significance of referencing the Codex Alimentarius General Principles of Food Hygiene, CXC 1-1969? Option A. To confirm that the organization's internal quality control procedures meet the minimum requirements for domestic market access, with no bearing on international standards. Option B. To ensure the organization's food safety management system aligns with internationally recognized benchmarks for hazard control and hygiene practices, facilitating global trade and regulatory compliance. Option C. To assess the organization's compliance with national food safety laws that may deviate significantly from international best practices without direct reference to Codex guidelines. Option D. To verify that the organization exclusively adopts the specific HAC model outlined in the Codex document, irrespective of other scientifically validated approaches. Correct answer is B. To ensure the organization's food safety management system aligns with internationally recognized benchmarks for hazard control and hygiene practices, facilitating global trade and regulatory compliance. Explanation. The Codex Alimentarius Commission, established by the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, FAO, and the World Health Organization, WHO, plays a pivotal role in developing international food standards, guidelines, and codes of practice. These documents serve as a benchmark for national food legislation and international trade. ISO 22000-2018, while a comprehensive standard for food safety management systems, explicitly references and aligns with the principles and recommendations laid out by the Codex Alimentarius. Specifically, the Codex General Principles of Food Hygiene, CXC 1-1969, as amended, are foundational, providing a framework for hazard analysis and critical control points, HAC, and prerequisite programs, PRP. ISO 22000-2018 integrates the HAC principles and the concept of PRPs, which are essential for controlling food safety hazards. Therefore, an auditor assessing an organization's compliance with ISO 22000-2018 must understand how the organization's food safety management system, including its HAC plan and PRPs, reflects the international benchmarks set by Codex. The auditor's role involves verifying that the implemented system is not only effective internally, but also aligns with these globally recognized standards to ensure safe food production and facilitate international trade. This alignment is crucial for demonstrating due diligence and adherence to widely accepted food safety practices, which are often incorporated into national regulations and import/export requirements. Question 18. An auditor is reviewing the documented scope of a food safety management system for a multinational food processing company that produces both ready-to-eat meals and ingredients for other food manufacturers. The company operates multiple production facilities across different continents and supplies products to various markets with distinct regulatory frameworks, including specific allergen labeling laws in one region and stringent microbiological criteria in another. Considering the requirements of ISO 22000-2018, what is the primary consideration for the auditor when evaluating the appropriateness of the defined FSMS scope? Option A. If the scope is limited to only the ready-to-eat meals, as these are considered the highest risk products for direct consumer consumption. Option B. If the scope focuses exclusively on the company's primary market, disregarding other regions with less stringent food safety regulations. Option C. Whether the scope explicitly details every single raw material supplier and their individual food safety certifications. Option D. Whether the scope adequately covers all food products, processes, and sites that could affect food safety, aligning with statutory and regulatory requirements and the organization's stated objectives. The correct answer is D. Whether the scope adequately covers all food products, processes, and sites that could affect food safety, aligning with statutory and regulatory requirements and the organization's stated objectives. Explanation: the scope of a food safety management system, FSMS, under ISO 22000-2018 defines the boundaries and applicability of the FSMS within an organization. It specifies the products, processes, and sites covered by the system. Determining the scope involves considering the organization's intended use of its products, statutory and regulatory requirements, and the organization's own policies and objectives. It also necessitates an understanding of the food chain and the products involved, including their intended use by the end consumer. The scope should encompass all activities, processes, and products that could impact food safety, from raw material sourcing to final product delivery. It is crucial that the scope is clearly documented and communicated throughout the organization. For an auditor, verifying the appropriateness and completeness of the defined scope is a fundamental step in assessing the FSMS. This involves examining how the organization has identified its products, processes, and the specific sites where food safety is managed. The auditor must ensure that the scope is consistent with the organization's business operations and that all relevant food safety hazards associated with the scoped activities have been considered. The scope should also reflect the organization's commitment to meeting customer requirements and applicable legal obligations related to food safety. The process of defining the scope is iterative and may need to be reviewed and updated as the organization's operations evolve. Question 19. During the closing meeting of an ISO 22000-2018 audit at a large bakery, the production manager expresses dissatisfaction with the number of critical nonconformities identified in the hack plan validation process. They request that the auditor remove 2 of these findings from the official report, arguing that these specific issues were already being addressed through an internal improvement initiative that had not yet been fully documented but was in active implementation. What is the most appropriate course of action for the auditor in this situation? Option A suggests that the auditor could consider reclassifying the 2 critical nonconformities as minor observations if the production manager provides immediate written confirmation of the ongoing internal improvement project during the meeting. Option B politely decline the request, stating that audit findings are based on evidence collected against the standards requirements and cannot be altered during the closing meeting, and that the existence of internal improvement initiatives, if not fully implemented and verifiable against the standard, does not negate the observed nonconformities. Option C agree to remove the 2 critical nonconformities from the report as a gesture of goodwill, given the bakery's commitment to continuous improvement, and note the internal initiative in the general observations section. Option D escalate the request to the lead auditor for a decision, explaining the manager's rationale and the potential impact on the audit outcome to ensure a fair and consistent assessment. The correct answer is B. Politely decline the request, stating that audit findings are based on evidence collected against the standards requirements and cannot be altered during the closing meeting, and that the existence of internal improvement initiatives, if not fully implemented and verifiable against the standard, does not negate the observed nonconformities. Explanation: the closing meeting of an ISO 22000-2018 audit serves as the formal conclusion of the audit activities. Its primary purpose is to communicate the audit findings, including any nonconformities, observations, and areas of good practice, to the auditee's management and relevant personnel. This communication ensures that the auditee fully understands the audit results and the implications for their food safety management system. The meeting is also an opportunity to discuss the next steps, such as the timeline for corrective actions and any follow-up activities. It is crucial that the auditor presents the findings objectively and factually, based on the evidence gathered during the audit. The closing meeting is not a forum for negotiation of findings or for the auditor to provide training or consultancy on how to rectify nonconformities. The auditor's role is to report what was observed and its relation to the standards requirements. Therefore, the most appropriate action for the auditor, when faced with a request to change the scope of the audit findings during the closing meeting, is to reiterate that the audit was conducted based on the agreed-upon scope, and that any deviations or additional findings are documented as observed, without modification. Question 20. When auditing a food manufacturing facility's response to a detected undeclared allergen in a batch of finished product, which aspect of their food safety management system requires the most rigorous verification to ensure compliance with ISO 2018, and relevant food safety regulations. Option A. The thoroughness of the traceability system in identifying all affected product distribution and the effectiveness of the recall execution and verification process. Option B. The adequacy of the employee training records specifically related to the allergen control plan implementation for the production line involved. Option C. The extent of marketing materials reviewed to ensure no misleading claims were made about allergen control measures prior to the incident. Option D. The promptness of internal communication to the sales department regarding the product hold and subsequent disposition instructions. Correct answer is A. The thoroughness of the traceability system in identifying all affected product distribution and the effectiveness of the recall execution and verification process. Explanation. The core of handling food safety incidents and recalls under ISO 22000-2018 involves a systematic approach that prioritizes consumer safety and regulatory compliance. An auditor must evaluate the organization's established procedures for immediate containment, investigation, and communication. This includes verifying that the organization has a documented incident management plan that outlines roles, responsibilities, and actions to be taken upon detection of a food safety issue. The plan should detail steps for identifying the scope of the problem, assessing the risk to consumers, and determining the appropriate response, which may include recall or withdrawal. Crucially, the auditor looks for evidence of effective communication channels, both internal and external, to inform relevant parties such as regulatory bodies, customers, and the public in a timely and transparent manner. The effectiveness of the corrective and preventive actions taken to address the root cause of the incident is also a key audit point, ensuring that similar issues are prevented in the future. The recall effectiveness check, which confirms that all affected product has been removed from circulation and that appropriate follow-up actions are completed, demonstrates the robustness of the system. Therefore, the auditor's focus is on the completeness and execution of the entire incident management process, from initial detection to post-recall evaluation, ensuring compliance with relevant food safety legislation and the organization's own food safety policy. Question 21. When auditing a food processing facility that manufactures ready-to-eat meals, an auditor is reviewing the control measures for Listeria monocytogenes contamination. The facility has implemented a strict sanitation program and a post-processing pasteurization step. The auditor needs to assess the adequacy of these controls. What is the primary criterion that must be demonstrated for these control measures to be considered effective and appropriately established within the ISO 22000-2018 framework? Option A. Documented evidence that the sanitation program and pasteurization process have been scientifically validated to consistently reduce Listeria monocytogenes to a level that does not pose a food safety risk. Option B. Records of routine monitoring showing that sanitation procedures are followed and pasteurization temperatures are maintained within specified ranges. Option C. A risk assessment that identifies Listeria monocytogenes as a significant hazard without specific evidence of control measure efficacy. Option D. A statement from the quality assurance manager confirming that the control measures are sufficient based on industry best practices. The correct answer is A. Documented evidence that the sanitation program and pasteurization process have been scientifically validated to consistently reduce Listeria monocytogenes to a level that does not pose a food safety risk. Explanation. The fundamental principle of control measure selection in ISO 22000-2018, particularly concerning the establishment of operational prerequisite programs (OPP) and prerequisite programs (PRP), hinges on the demonstrated effectiveness of the control measure in reducing the hazard to an acceptable level. This effectiveness is not merely a theoretical postulation, but requires validation. Validation confirms that a control measure, or a combination of control measures, consistently achieves the intended food safety outcome. For instance, if a thermal processing step is identified as a control measure for a specific pathogen, validation would involve demonstrating through scientific studies or historical data that the processing parameters, temperature, time, etc., reliably eliminate or reduce the pathogen to a level that does not pose a food safety risk, as defined by the organization's food safety policy and objectives. This contrasts with verification, which confirms that the control measure is implemented as planned and is functioning as intended, often through monitoring and testing. The ability of the control measure to consistently achieve the desired reduction in hazard, as proven through validation, is the primary criterion for its establishment as an OPUP or PRP. The regulatory context, such as specific limits for contaminants set by bodies like the European Food Safety Authority, EFSA, or the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, FDA, informs the acceptable level of the hazard, which in turn guides the validation process. Question 22. When auditing a food manufacturing facility that produces ready-to-eat meals for hospitals, what preliminary step, crucial for enabling a comprehensive hazard analysis according to ISO 22000-2018, would an auditor primarily focus on verifying if the organization has adequately addressed the unique vulnerabilities of its target consumer group? Option A. Confirmation that the organization has clearly defined and documented the intended use of the ready-to-eat meals, including specific preparation instructions for healthcare staff and consideration of potential immunocompromised patient populations. Option B. Examination of the management review minutes to ensure that food safety objectives are regularly discussed and updated based on market trends. Option C. Verification of the existence and implementation of a robust internal audit schedule covering all critical control points identified in the hack plan. Option D. Assessment of the organization's supplier approval process and the evidence of regular performance reviews for all key raw material providers. The correct answer is A. Confirmation that the organization has clearly defined and documented the intended use of the ready-to-eat meals, including specific preparation instructions for healthcare staff and consideration of potential immunocompromised patient populations. Explanation. The preliminary steps to enable hazard analysis, as outlined in ISO 22000-2018, are crucial for establishing a solid foundation for the subsequent hazard identification and risk assessment processes. These steps are designed to ensure that the organization has the necessary information and context to conduct a thorough and effective hazard analysis. This involves understanding the intended use of the food product, which includes considering how consumers will handle and prepare the product, and identifying any specific dietary needs or sensitivities that might be relevant. It also encompasses defining the scope of the food safety management system, which dictates which products, processes, and sites are included in the analysis. Furthermore, it requires the establishment of prerequisite programs, PRP, that control operational conditions and, importantly, the identification of the food safety team and its responsibilities. The food safety team is responsible for developing, implementing, and maintaining the food safety management system, including the hazard analysis. Without a clear understanding of the product's intended use, the scope of the system, the effectiveness of PRPs, and a competent food safety team, the hazard analysis would be incomplete and potentially flawed, leading to ineffective control measures. Question 23. When auditing a food manufacturing facility certified to ISO 22000-2018, how should an auditor most effectively assess the organization's performance evaluation of its food safety management system, considering the organization's responsibility to monitor, measure, analyze, and evaluate its food safety performance to ensure its continued suitability, adequacy, and effectiveness? Option A. Reviewing the organization's documented procedures for data analysis and evaluating how the insights derived from this analysis are used to drive improvements in food safety processes and achieve food safety objectives. Option B. Confirming that the organization conducts regular internal audits of all its operational prerequisite programs and control measures. Option C. Examining the frequency of management review meetings and the attendance records of top management during these sessions. Option D. Verifying that the organization has established a comprehensive list of all potential food safety hazards identified in its hack plan. The correct answer is A. Reviewing the organization's documented procedures for data analysis and evaluating how the insights derived from this analysis are used to drive improvements in food safety processes and achieve food safety objectives. Explanation. The question asks about the most appropriate method for an auditor to evaluate the effectiveness of a food safety management system's performance within the context of ISO 22000-2018. ISO 22000-2018 emphasizes a process approach and the need for an organization to monitor, measure, analyze, and evaluate its food safety performance. Clause 9. 1. Monitoring, measurement, analysis, and evaluation specifically addresses this, requires organizations to determine what needs to be monitored and measured, the methods for monitoring, measurement, analysis, and evaluation needed to ensure the validity of the results, when the monitoring and measurement should be performed, and when the results from monitoring and measurement should be analyzed and evaluated. For an auditor, assessing the effectiveness of these processes involves examining how the organization uses data to drive improvements and ensure food safety. This includes reviewing trends in key performance indicators, KPI, related to food safety, such as the number of nonconformities, customer complaints, product recalls, and the effectiveness of corrective actions. The analysis of this data should demonstrate a clear link between the monitored parameters and the overall achievement of food safety objectives. Simply collecting data or conducting internal audits without a systematic analysis and evaluation to identify areas for improvement would not be sufficient. Therefore, evaluating the organization's use of analyzed data to drive continuous improvement in its food safety performance is the most comprehensive and effective approach for an auditor. Question 24. During an audit of a multinational food processing company, an auditor is evaluating the effectiveness of their external communication processes concerning food safety. The company has received an alert from a foreign regulatory body regarding a potential contaminant in a specific batch of a key ingredient sourced from a third-party supplier. The company's internal food safety team has confirmed the presence of the contaminant at a level that exceeds the permissible limit set by the importing country's food safety legislation. What is the most critical immediate action the organization must take according to the principles of ISO 22000-2018 regarding external communication in this scenario? Option A. Immediately notify all affected customers and relevant regulatory authorities about the detected contaminant and the steps being taken to manage the situation. Option B. Contact the supplier to demand an explanation and corrective actions before informing any external parties. Option C. Update the internal hazard analysis and risk assessment documentation to reflect the new information before communicating externally. Option D. Initiate a full product recall of all items containing the affected ingredient without prior external notification to avoid panic. The correct answer is A. Immediately notify all affected customers and relevant regulatory authorities about the detected contaminant and the steps being taken to manage the situation. Explanation: ISO 22000-2018 Clause 7.4 specifies requirements for external communication related to food safety. This clause mandates that an organization shall establish a system for external communication regarding food safety matters. The effectiveness of this system is crucial for managing risks and ensuring transparency. When an auditor reviews the external communication process, they must verify that the organization has established clear channels for receiving, responding to, and disseminating information concerning food safety. This includes communication with customers about product recalls or potential hazards, with suppliers regarding raw material quality or changes in specifications that could impact food safety, and with regulatory authorities for compliance reporting or notifications. The auditor's objective is to confirm that the communication is timely, accurate, and addresses all relevant food safety aspects as defined by the organization's Food Safety Management System, FSMS. A critical aspect is the documented procedure for handling such communications, including designated responsibilities and the method for retaining records of these interactions. The auditor would look for evidence of proactive communication, especially when potential hazards are identified or when changes in regulations necessitate updates to product labeling or handling instructions. The effectiveness is measured by the organization's ability to manage food safety issues through its external interactions, thereby protecting consumer health and maintaining regulatory compliance. Question 25. During an audit of a facility producing vacuum-packed smoked salmon, an auditor is reviewing the hazard analysis for Listeria monocytogenes a significant biological hazard. The facility proposes chilling and vacuum packaging as control measures. The auditor needs to assess if these measures, as implemented, are sufficient to control the hazard to an acceptable level. Which hazard analysis technique, commonly employed under ISO 22000-2018, would best assist the auditor in systematically evaluating the capability of these control measures to manage the identified hazard? Option A. Hazard and Operability Study (HAZOP). Option B. failure mode and effects analysis FME. Option C, decision tree analysis. Option D, preliminary hazard analysis FA. The correct answer is C, decision tree analysis. Explanation: the core of hazard analysis in ISO 22000-2018 is identifying potential food safety hazards and determining the significance of these hazards. A key aspect is the selection of appropriate control measures. When evaluating a potential biological hazard, such as the presence of Listeria monocytogenes in a ready-to-eat product, an auditor must assess the effectiveness of the proposed control measures. Decision trees are a structured tool used to systematically determine if a control measure is capable of controlling the identified hazard to an acceptable level. The process involves asking a series of yes/no questions related to the hazard's characteristics, the control measure's capability, and the product's intended use. For instance, a decision tree might start with a question like, is the hazard likely to be present in the raw material? Followed by, does the process step eliminate or reduce the hazard to an acceptable level? Or, does the process step prevent contamination or recontamination? If the control measure, when subjected to these logical steps, is determined to be effective in controlling the hazard to an acceptable level, it can be designated as a critical control point, CCP. If the measure is not capable of controlling the hazard to an acceptable level on its own, it might be considered a prerequisite program, PRP, or require further controls. The auditor's role is to verify that the decision-making process for hazard control is documented and scientifically sound, ensuring that the identified CCPs and PRPs are appropriate and effectively managed to maintain food safety. This systematic approach ensures that all significant hazards are adequately controlled throughout the food production process, aligning with the standard's emphasis on a science-based and preventive approach to food safety. Question 26. During an audit of a ready-to-eat meal producer, the auditor reviews chilling records for a cooked product where Listeria monocytogenes has been identified as a critical hazard. The established critical control point, CCP, for this hazard is the chilling process, with a critical limit of maintaining the product temperature at or below /4/circ within 6 hours post-cooking. The records reveal a specific batch where the product reached /5/circ after 7 hours. What is the most appropriate immediate action for the food business to take regarding this non-conforming product batch, in alignment with ISO 22000-2018 principles for controlling nonconformities? Option A. Initiate a product recall for all batches produced within the last 24 hours, assuming widespread contamination. Option B. Immediately discard the entire affected batch to eliminate any potential risk of Listeria contamination. Option C. Rechill the affected batch to /4/circ or below and release it for sale after retesting the temperature. Option D. Segregate the affected batch and conduct a thorough evaluation to determine its food safety status before any further action. The correct answer is D. Segregate the affected batch and conduct a thorough evaluation to determine its food safety status before any further action. Explanation: the scenario describes a food processing facility that has implemented a hack plan to control the biological hazard of Listeria monocytogenes in a ready-to-eat product. The critical control point, CCP, identified for this hazard is the chilling process, with a critical limit of maintaining the product temperature at or below /4/circ within 6 hours of cooking. Monitoring records indicate that on one occasion the product reached /5/circ after 7 hours. This deviation from the critical limit signifies a loss of control, according to ISO 22000-2018 Clause 8. 5. 4. Control of nonconformities. When a nonconformity occurs, the organization must take action to control and correct it and deal with the consequences. This involves evaluating the nonconformity and its impact on the safety of the product. In this specific case, the deviation from the critical limit for Listeria monocytogenes chilling suggests that the product may have entered a temperature range where the bacteria could grow or survive. Therefore, the appropriate action is to segregate and evaluate the affected product to determine its safety before it is released for consumption. This evaluation might involve laboratory testing for Listeria or a review of the process to understand the root cause of the deviation and its potential impact on the entire batch. Simply rechilling the product or discarding it without proper evaluation might not be the most effective or compliant approach. Rechilling might not reverse any potential growth, and discarding without assessment might be unnecessarily wasteful if the product is still safe. The core principle is to ensure that no unsafe food enters the market. Question 27. An auditor is reviewing the internal communication processes at a large food processing facility to assess compliance with ISO 22000-2018. The facility produces a range of dairy products and has multiple production lines, a dedicated quality assurance department, and a logistics team responsible for raw material and finished product handling. During the audit, it becomes apparent that while daily production updates are shared via email within the production floor, significant changes to the allergen control plan, implemented due to a new supplier of a key ingredient, were only communicated to the QA department and line supervisors, with no direct communication to the packing staff who handle the final product labeling. What is the most critical deficiency in the facility's internal communication system concerning food safety management? Option A. Over-reliance on digital communication methods, neglecting the need for face-to-face briefings for all staff. Option B. Insufficient frequency of email communications regarding routine production performance metrics. Option C. Failure to establish documented procedures for communicating critical food safety information across all relevant organizational levels and functions. Option D. Limited scope of communication solely focused on production line supervisors and excluding administrative staff. The correct answer is C. Failure to establish documented procedures for communicating critical food safety information across all relevant organizational levels and functions. Explanation: the effectiveness of internal communication within a food safety management system, as mandated by ISO 22000-2018, hinges on its ability to facilitate the flow of information relevant to food safety across all levels and functions of an organization. Clause 7. 4 of the standard specifically addresses communication, emphasizing that the organization shall ensure internal communication takes place concerning the food safety management system. This includes determining what to communicate, when to communicate, with whom to communicate, how to communicate, and who is responsible for communicating. A key aspect is ensuring that relevant information regarding food safety issues, changes to processes, new hazards identified, or updates to control measures is effectively disseminated to all personnel who have a role in maintaining food safety. This communication must be bidirectional, allowing for feedback and the reporting of concerns. When assessing internal communication, an auditor would look for evidence that mechanisms are in place to ensure that all employees are aware of their responsibilities, the importance of their contribution to food safety, and any changes that might impact the food safety of the product. This includes communication from top management about the food safety policy and objectives, as well as communication from operational staff about potential issues. The absence of clear channels for reporting nonconformities or emerging food safety risks, or a lack of documented procedures for disseminating critical updates, would indicate a deficiency. Therefore, the most comprehensive approach to ensuring effective internal communication is to establish clear, documented procedures that cover all aspects of information flow related to food safety across the entire organization, ensuring all personnel are informed and can contribute to the system's ongoing improvement. Question 28. During an audit of a large dairy processing facility, an auditor observes that the critical control point monitoring records for pasteurization appear meticulously maintained, with all parameters within specified limits. However, during an interview, long-term production supervisor expresses a subtle concern about occasional fluctuations in pasteurizer temperature that are not always captured by the automated logging system due to its limitations. Which personal attribute is most critical for the auditor to demonstrate in this situation to ensure a thorough and accurate assessment of the pasteurization CCP? Option A, objectivity. Option B, decisiveness. Option C, empathy. Option D, assertiveness. Correct answer is A, objectivity. Explanation: the effectiveness of an ISO 22000-2018 audit hinges on the auditor's ability to remain impartial and base findings on objective evidence. This requires a conscious effort to avoid preconceived notions or personal biases that could influence the assessment of a food safety management system. An auditor must be prepared to challenge assumptions and gather verifiable information from various sources, such as documentation review, interviews, and on-site observations. The principle of objectivity is fundamental to ensuring the credibility and reliability of the audit process. When an auditor suspects a deviation from the standard, they must actively seek concrete proof rather than relying on intuition or hearsay. This involves cross-referencing information, looking for inconsistencies, and ensuring that any conclusions drawn are directly supported by factual data. Maintaining an objective stance is crucial for identifying genuine nonconformities and areas for improvement, thereby contributing to the overall enhancement of the organization's food safety performance. Question 29. An ISO 22018 auditor is reviewing the implementation of a food manufacturer's hack plan. They discover a recorded instance where a critical control point for pasteurization temperature fell below the established critical limit. The auditor's investigation reveals internal documentation from the quality assurance manager stating that this deviation was deemed a minor, infrequent occurrence and did not necessitate the initiation of the documented corrective action procedure because the product was still considered safe for consumption based on a subjective risk assessment. Which fundamental audit principle is most directly challenged by the manufacturer's approach to managing the CCP deviation? Option A, fair presentation. Option B, due professional care. Option C, independence. Option D, evidence-based approach. Correct answer is D, evidence-based approach. Explanation. The scenario describes an auditor reviewing a food manufacturer's hack plan and observing a deviation from a critical control point, CCP limit, that was not addressed by a corrective action. The auditor then finds internal documentation indicating that this deviation was considered a minor issue and not requiring formal corrective action due to its infrequent occurrence and perceived low risk. This situation directly challenges the audit principle of evidence-based approach. An evidence-based approach requires that audit conclusions and recommendations are based on the analysis and evaluation of audit evidence. In this case, the auditor's evidence, the unaddressed deviation, and the internal documentation points to a potential breakdown in the documented food safety system. The internal documentation's subjective assessment of risk and frequency, without objective verification or adherence to the established CCP corrective action procedures, undermines the factual basis for the decision not to act. The auditor must base their findings on objective evidence, not on the auditee's internal interpretation or dismissal of a nonconformance. The independence principle is also relevant as the auditor must remain objective and free from undue influence. But the core issue highlighted by the question is the reliance on verifiable evidence rather than subjective interpretations of risk. Fair presentation requires that the audit findings accurately reflect the audit evidence. Due professional care implies diligence and skill in conducting the audit, which includes scrutinizing the justification for non-action. Confidentiality relates to protecting information. Integrity is a foundational principle, but the specific failure here is in the evidence gathering and evaluation. Question 30. Assessment of the situation at a large multinational food processing company, Agri-Harvest Foods, reveals that their internal audit program, designed to verify compliance with ISO 22018, has shown a consistent decline in the identification of critical nonconformities over the past 3 audit cycles. Simultaneously, external audits by certification bodies have identified a higher rate of significant nonconformities related to prerequisite programs and operational control procedures. The company's management is seeking to understand the most appropriate basis for initiating a review and potential modification of their existing audit program. Which of the following principles most directly underpins the rationale for such a review and modification? Option A. The need to reduce the number of internal audits conducted to minimize operational disruption and associated costs, thereby improving overall efficiency. Option B. The imperative to continually improve the suitability, adequacy, and effectiveness of the food safety management system by enhancing the audit program's ability to detect systemic weaknesses. Option C. The requirement to maintain a predetermined audit schedule to ensure all clauses of ISO 22018 are covered within a 5-year rotation, irrespective of performance data. Option D. The obligation to prioritize the auditor competency framework over the actual audit findings to ensure that auditors possess the latest theoretical knowledge. The correct answer is B. The imperative to continually improve the suitability, adequacy, and effectiveness of the food safety management system by enhancing the audit program's ability to detect systemic weaknesses. Explanation: the effectiveness of an audit program is directly linked to its ability to adapt and improve based on performance data and feedback. ISO 22000-2018, while not dictating specific metrics, implies a need for a systematic approach to evaluating the audit program itself. Clause 9.3. Management review requires top management to review the organization's FSMS, which includes reviewing the results of audits. Furthermore, Clause 10.2. Continual improvement mandates that the organization shall continually improve the suitability, adequacy, and effectiveness of the FSMS. Monitoring and reviewing the audit program's performance are crucial components of this continual improvement process. Key indicators for monitoring could include the number of nonconformities identified per audit, the trend of nonconformities over time, the timeliness of audit closure, the competence of auditors, and feedback from auditees. Analyzing these indicators helps in identifying systemic issues within the audit process itself, such as inadequate auditor training, insufficient audit scope, or ineffective corrective actions. Based on this analysis, adjustments can be made to the audit plan, auditor assignments, audit methodologies, or training programs to enhance the overall effectiveness and value of the audit program in verifying the conformity and effectiveness of the food safety management system. Therefore, the primary driver for reviewing and modifying the audit program is the need to ensure its ongoing suitability, adequacy, and effectiveness in supporting the organization's food safety objectives and the continual improvement of the FSMS.